Good afternoon, everybody. This is Laura Sparkman. I am the Vice President for Clinical Effectiveness at Advanced Practice Strategies. Thank you for joining today. We've got a featured speaker, Dr. Nancy Cossler, and I'll introduce her here shortly, to talk about funding and implementing GNOSIS for obstetrics featuring university hospitals, which is where Dr. Cossler hails from. Before we get started, I've got a few background and context setting slides I want to go through with you today to really talk about what is GNOSIS, what makes GNOSIS different, what impact does GNOSIS have, how do health systems fund and integrate GNOSIS, and how do GNOSIS analytics drive clinical improvement efforts and work. A little bit of background about who APS is. We really have two primary product lines. One is called Prophecy, and you're going to learn about GNOSIS today, specifically about obstetrics. Prophecy is really a hiring and onboarding solution, and really is focused in on developing solutions for ensuring we get the best and brightest nurses into our hospitals and that we keep them educated and satisfied, and they want to stay in your organization for a very long time. It's an assessment-based, evidence-based process, and if you'd like to hear more, there would be information at the end of this call. But today we're going to talk about GNOSIS for OB. So what is GNOSIS? First of all, Gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge. We hear that often. It's a very common question. So if you were thinking that, you're not alone there, but it is the Greek word for knowledge. We really are a very unique solution, and we take a unique approach to adult learning. We are assessment-driven that derives from the assessment results a personalized learning path, and that generates analytics. And this is really an important slide that sets the context to really how adults learn. And typically, we measure two primary variables in all of our programs, knowledge and judgment. It's a standardized assessment with some different slightly different questions based on your orientation, if you're a provider or a nurse. Again, you're given clinical scenarios, management plans, and then you have an interactive dynamic situation where you are able to answer the questions. Our data is really what is very unique in how we're approaching education. Here are the two primary variables that we talk about, judgment and knowledge on the X and Y axis. And imagine once you complete your baseline assessment, each one of these dots represent an organization or an individual, and you're getting the first time to get a look into how did my team perform, how does my hospital compare to the entire U.S. That's the green dot could represent your hospital, and then you get the opportunity to say, am I above average or below the percentile rank? If you're a multi-hospital system, you get to see how each facility compares to the other and compared to the national benchmark. And again, we talk about individual clinicians. How do they score above and below their peers nationally on that content? And then over time, you reassess, and then you get the opportunity to see change over time. In addition, one of the areas that we're able to show you is impact and improvement and value on seat time efficiency and effectiveness. Because it's assessment-based, you're actually testing into content that you need and testing out of content that you don't need. And that's where the seat time savings really comes in. On average, for our fetal assessment and monitoring course, as an example, it's a little over an hour. And for the learning path, it's really right around 2 hours. So that's a great savings on seat time. The other thing we show is deeper engagement for nurses and providers. We've seen a 6.7% increase in providers staying in content, which is significant, and nursing spending 3 times more in content because, again, it's focused on what they need to know, and that's a hallmark for adult learning. This is an example of a standard report that you get once you complete assessment data. This is baseline assessment data on fetal assessment and monitoring for an 11-hospital system. Each of those orange squares represents a hospital, and you can see that their overall system average, the black triangle, was below, and after reassessment 12 months later in that content, you can see the change and improvement over time. And that's exactly what we want to see. We have many studies and examples. We get this question often, does this make a difference in claims? Does GNOSIS make a difference in patient safety? And it does. We have examples here. A publication in AJOG by Dr. Stephen Clark. They saw a 67% reduction in claims by implementing GNOSIS and e-learning. And then we've also seen by the Department of Defense a significant decrease in the high severity of cases of OB malpractice, 62% decrease. So more details on that on our website, and we're happy to share that with you. Also, ACOG and AHRQ and AWON and several other national organizations, CMQCC, talk about the need to continue to improve patient safety and reduce harm. And there is a national focus. So, for example, AHRQ, a commitment to safety that permeates all levels of the organization. So we really have to engage leadership all the way to the sharp end, which is at the bedside. And then again, the Joint Commission and the focus on sentinel events, that you really have to focus on the full team. In addition, we've had a long-time relationship with AWON, became very solidified in 2016 around us working together. We have the same mission around improving care for moms and babies that we all serve through education and through the combination of education, instructor-led, live courses, and e-learning. And that is where the blended model of learning comes from. And we'll be talking more about that over time. So with that, that's a little bit of backdrop to who APS is and what GNOSIS is. And I would like to welcome Dr. Nancy Cossler. Hello, Dr. Cossler. Dr. Cossler is the Chief System Quality and Obstetrics at University Hospitals. She's the Vice Chair of Quality and Patient Safety for University Hospitals, MacDonald Women's Hospitals in Cleveland, Ohio. So we're thrilled that you could be here with us today, Dr. Cossler. We're going to jump right into this, and just so everybody knows, we want this to be very conversational. I'm going to have you, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about your health system.
Sure. So I first want to say, and I told Laura that I was going to say this before I started speaking, we have used GNOSIS and APS here in our main hospital for, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, for 3 years, and in all of our hospitals now in the past year. I have never been paid by GNOSIS. I don't have any stock in GNOSIS, but I happen to believe that this is the most extraordinary learning system, educational tool for adults that I have ever seen, and we are very excited by using it. But to get back to who we are, University Hospitals is an academic tertiary medical center, and we do 4,000 deliveries a year. I am a general OBGYN. I'm a practicing obstetrician still. I still practice 1 day a week, and I lead the quality and patient safety here. We University Hospitals acquired 5 system hospitals, now 6 since the slide was made, who collectively do 4,000 deliveries also. These are each community hospitals, level 1 in the old newborn and probably maternal level of care 2. We are a maternal level of care 4 hospital.
Excellent, Dr. Cossler. So can you talk a little bit about kind of your North Star? What's been your big vision and a driving force for, your mantra and how you are interacting across the system?
So this sign, what is best for the patient, is the lens with which we see all of our work. Really, it came from reading the Mayo Management book. It came from the original quote. Many of you may be familiar with it from the Mayo Clinic. But we think we distilled this down to what is best for the patient. These signs are posted all over MacDonald Women's Hospital. They're posted in every presentation that we give at our hospital and our system hospitals. And it really boils down to doing the right thing. That's how we decide what to do, what is best for the patient.
One of the things that strikes me every time I'm interacting with you and your providers and your nurses is that there's really a fairly flat hierarchy, and I think it's attributed to what is best for the patient. There's no acquiescing to any particular peer group, and I think folks listening in today would love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
That's absolutely true. And if you look at this slide, and I think all of you will recognize some of the standard processes that are used to help on the journey to high reliability. We started where we had some significant poor outcomes for moms and babies, and we knew we had to do something. And so we've been working at this process for the last 5 years at Mac House and now 6 years with the system. Absolutely, we are one team. I will emphasize this several times as I'm speaking, but at a lot of places, quality and patient safety is something that's done by nurses, and that nurses guide. And I firmly believe that we have made the progress we have made, and that kind of progress cannot be made without a flattening of the hierarchy, without understanding that medicine is a team sport, without doctors and nurses doing this together. Malpractice rates will not drop, and all of the other improved patient outcomes will not occur, I don't believe, without this as a joint effort from the whole team. So our decision to purchase GNOSIS was made about 3 years ago, and again, echoing that theme, the most important bullet points on this slide are this educational tool is used by doctors, nurses, midwives, and RNs. We all sit down to do it. We do it at the same time. That is a statement that not only puts us using the same language, but that is a statement that all of us contribute to the care of the patient, and therefore this education that we do is important to do it together. If you haven't used GNOSIS yet, in addition to doing it together, it allows individuals to have their own feedback and learning, and it allows myself and other leaders in the institution to see where the strengths and opportunities are.
Okay, I was just going to ask if you can talk just a little bit about that transition, over the last 3 years. You're in a very different place than you were when you guys started, and every year there's a much more tightening, and I would say in all hands on deck an agreement that this, the results of this are meaningful, which leads to other decisions, going forward about scores and the ongoing education and what additional education, in terms of your expansion plans.
Right. So for the physicians on the phone, I think you would agree that this is a very, very new situation for doctors to be in. I am a board-certified obstetrician, and I've been board-certified for 28 years. But the concept that learning and learning together and speaking the same language is as important to me and my colleagues as it is to nurses, because I think that nurses are more used to this sort of learning and taking tests and being held accountable for how well they do on those assessments. But that's a new thing for doctors. We have used GNOSIS for 3 years. Only in this past year have we started to actually formulate a plan for supporting learning beyond what the tool itself supports. So you do the assessment, you do your learning paths. All of us learn, even if you are the highest scorer in the institution. Everybody learns something individually when they do it. But really the question became, what do we do with the folks who fall below what we believe are the minimum standards for what we need? We have instituted care guidelines, which we all agree to, and we all give oxytocin in the same fashion, for instance. So that's one way that we've learned that we have to morph our practice. This is another way that we have to be responsible for being up to date, to taking our own learning seriously, to check our ego at the door, and to work together to do it.
Perfect. So I think that that's a great segue to this slide right here to talk about really how that journey, as you've been moving towards high reliability, kind of where you are now in terms of a new funding model, et cetera.
So the GNOSIS and the initial UHOB network funding originally came from risk. We're self-insured, but now it is, as it's grown, is supported by quality. We have, as I mentioned, expanded to now 7 facilities that provide obstetric care, and our emergency department has just signed for this tool to be used in our EDs based on our experience. I can tell you that when I presented the tool to the hospital presidents, CEOs, CMOs, and CNOs for the system, I have multiple questions from surgical specialties and from medical specialties about whether this was available in their specialty too. But based on what we've been able to do, in fact, I'm meeting with the chair of ED after this, it also has been adopted by our emergency department. It takes support. My colleagues are not going to be participating or feel it's important without clearly understanding that I and all the other leaders are doing the same thing. And it's really helping us put together a better plan as an individual and as a system for improving our care.
Well, Nancy, before you move on, just very quickly, if you can go back one, can you talk a little bit about the leadership support? I feel you're being very humble, but I do think it does take complete leader engagement and management of what's happening across the system. Can you talk a little bit about how you interact with people and or your philosophy and or expectations around not just GNOSIS, but how everybody works together? Because I think it's really important for those listening in today. By the way, we have several, chief medical officers, chief nursing officers, learning leaders, risk leaders, etc.
The first thing it takes is FaceTime. I have to be there, and I and my team have to enable local champions to embrace this support. And at the end of the day, what is best for the patient and doing the right thing, we just do it because it's right. Why should one of our hospitals participate in this? They don't want to. They're doing just fine on their own. Well, because we're all going to give better care this way, and this is how we're all going to learn. And it can't be done from someone's office or through email. You have to be on the ground. And so we've also used it to help us, as this slide indicates, drive our care by overcoming, here's how one of our hospitals has always done it, and they call it the Geauga way, and here's how another hospital has always done it, that's the Elyria way. By being there, by thinking about ourselves as a system, by championing this with FaceTime, it's really helped us come together and drive this change, because this is new to many in medicine, and it's certainly new to some of our community hospitals.
Dr. Cossler, the concept of reducing variation, and again, this scatter plot shows that, but I know that that's, obviously a big component and a value proposition of what we talk about all the time on the clinical effectiveness side. But if you can kind of bridge the gap between, educating people up about why it's important to reduce variation, create that standardization across multiple facilities. And here's an example of some of your scores, physician scores.
So this is the obstetric hemorrhage module, and you can see our 6 hospitals identified. I hope they're all okay with that. And as well as the University Hospital overall score, which is the black triangle. But it is very powerful when you are talking either to individuals or to hospitals to say, okay, here's where we are. We want to be in the right upper hand quadrant. That's where we're driving to. Here's where we are the first time through, and here's where we are compared to our national peers. So whether you're talking about individual providers or hospitals in general, that's a very powerful driver, because everybody comes to work wanting to do the right thing for the patient. And it is motivational to be able to share this kind of data with all of our hospitals, as well as individuals. Yeah, and same kind of data for individuals.
Absolutely, and we hear this time and time again, and from all of our clients. The next slide really, I think you can talk to specifically on what this meant on the clinical, content side, because you're able to see assessment 1 scores, the gray diamonds, and then the colored diamonds represent your assessment 2 on fetal assessment and monitoring.
Right. This shows the 4 knowledge areas, the 4 practice areas that are covered by fetal assessment and monitoring. It allows us as a system to know what areas require the most focus for us, and it does show improvement over time. This is, again, as Laura mentioned, the first time through for this set of nurses who took this assessment, and then the second time through 2 years later. So there's a slide further on in the presentation that talks about how you plan this rollout, and that's this. There are 4 major modules that we're learning or using, and we are using hypertensive disorders and short dystocia in, oh, I need my glasses, hang on. We're using hypertensive and obstetrical hemorrhage in 1 year, and in the odd years, short dystocia and fetal assessment. So we've just started in 2017. We're doing, we've just finished fetal assessment and monitoring, and that was fall and winter. And now we're moving to short dystocia, and next fall we'll be doing hypertensive disorders, so that we alternate every 2 years. Why do you keep doing them over again? Because these are crucial areas in the work that we do, because knowledge changes over time, and we went through fetal assessment for the second time in the updated GNOSIS course, and you have new people all the time. So again, the concept of doing this as a team, everybody doing it together, I think is important in acceptance and making a difference.
Agreed. So, so you've got this nice cadence to learning. You've got a kind of a year-over-year plan. I think that, you know, that's been an evolution over time too, over the 3 years, and the cadence of, you know, when are you going to do a particular course, and then when you're going to reassess, and then how you're managing the data, and then the implications to individual users depending on where they score. Can you talk a little bit about the score management piece?
So as I said, in our own experience, it was important for us to go through GNOSIS a few times, to understand how it works, to see its benefit. Almost to a person, I have never had, for instance, a physician come to me and say, you know, that was a waste of my time. I've not experienced anyone who thought that. But to understand, to get a feel for it, and once you've done that a few times, then to start really using the individual scores to drive change for individuals, to see where the opportunity is. Of course, a score is not the only way you judge a physician or a nurse, but I am struck by the fact that those folks who ended up in the level that we think is unacceptable and need to be addressed were predictable, except for a few who probably took it too fast the first time they went through, and we all know that happens. But once people understand that this matters, then no one does that again. But for the first time now, based on fetal assessment and monitoring, we have chosen the lower 25th percentile in judgment and knowledge. We have identified those folks. We are going to ask them to reassess after supportive learning, and we've passed out articles, and they're going to do some of the clinical pearls. For folks who scored mixed, they weren't in the upper 50th percentile for both, but they were somewhere in between those that we have major concerns about. We've identified articles and identified clinical pearls for them to do as additional learning, but we are not requiring them to reassess. And the nurses have devised their own program, and it's very similar to ours.
Well, I think the important piece there is that you've really kind of thought through what does it mean. You've set a threshold for the organization. I think the one thing, just in terms of context for folks that are new to GNOSIS, we do have a very large database. As an example, I'll give you one example. For fetal assessment and monitoring, we have almost 20,000 nursing completed assessments. So that's a very important benchmark and actionable data. And like what you were talking about, Dr. Cossler, that's really how many and most of our clients think through score management. And to your point, taking the assessment and the results matter, right? Because this is the national-based evidence, and you know, the content is really not disputable, but we talked about that at some point as well. So we're at a point where there's some Q&A, and Tom in our Boston office is going to join us here on the line, and I think there's some questions. Before, Tom, you join in, one of the things, Dr. Cossler, I have a question for you, which I anticipate others might be wanting to know. What outcomes have you seen so far with where you are in kind of your journey towards high reliability and perinatal safety with using GNOSIS?
So it's hard to isolate it because GNOSIS has been a key linchpin to several parts of our program, right? So I can tell you, including GNOSIS, what we have seen is we ourselves have a drop in paid claims and dollar reserves over at all of our hospitals, actually, but most importantly at MacHouse right now over the last several years. We have evidence of when looked at per delivery volume and using the exact same triggers, a decrease in referrals to our OB/QA committee. We had a major project that we did on obstetric hemorrhage and transfusion, and we had 6 parameters that we measured, 6 quality outcomes, and all of those showed an improvement, and that part of that was tied to the use of the OB hemorrhage module with GNOSIS. All of them showed improvement over 1 year, with the exception of the blood loss associated with the delivery, whether vaginal or cesarean section, but that's because at the same time we have gone from EBL to QBL. And so quantifying our blood loss as expected has increased the true blood loss. I don't think it's changed at all, but it's increased it. So we definitely have.
Would you say it's more accurate? You're feeling more confident that the quantification of the blood loss is more accurate than it was at your baseline?
Absolutely.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, Tom, any questions that have come in?
Sure. Hey, Laura, Dr. Cossler. Do you administer to all the physicians and nurses as well?
Yes.
Is it for everybody? Is it required? Is it part of the system?
Yes, so I will, for those on the phone, we have independent physicians at our community hospitals that make up a minority of the practice, and the rest of the physicians are employed. So what do you do about that? How do you make this work? Our system leadership, the chief operating officer of the hospital system and the hospital presidents agreed to make privileges to practice obstetrics at one of our hospitals by the fact that we have granted you those privileges. You have now agreed to follow and be part of the precepts of the UHOB network standard operating procedure, which includes GNOSIS. So everybody does it. It doesn't matter who your employer is. The same for the nurses, and they're all hospital employees, so that part was easy.
Dr. Cossler, how about residents? Is it part of their program as well?
It is, and I think it's a validation of GNOSIS in that the residents, of course, are learners, but the residents' scores mimic their academic level.
Dr. Cossler, this is Laura. So I just want to underscore a little bit of what you said in that previous answer about going to the C-suite, and getting that buy-in, and really that, GNOSIS has to be validated and really embraced to make those changes that you did, and that it's a condition of, delivering babies in your hospitals. That's, right. I think everybody listening, that is a trend we see nationally, and I would say probably a best practice because it takes the carrot and the stick, out of the equation of whether you're going to have physicians do education or not. Can you just talk a little bit more about kind of the list to do that? We know it's not always an easy thing to do, but how did you make it happen at UH?
I had the full support of the Chief Operating Officer of the system. And without that, none of this would have been possible. I presented the proposed program for the UHOB network, as I mentioned, to the hospital presidents, CMOs of all of our hospitals. I got their buy-in. We asked each hospital to identify their own OB champions. So doctors, nurses, and quality people self-identify, because all change is local, and you need cheerleaders within each institution. Then we took the standard operating procedure, and my CEO made a very strong statement to the hospital presidents who were present at the meeting, and stopped me during my presentation and said, "Did every hospital president hear what Nancy just said? If you do not agree to support this organization and this work, then you will not provide obstetric care in our system." And then we went to each medical executive committee at each hospital and had the standard operating procedure voted and accepted by the MEC of each hospital. And then when everyone was re-credentialed, because all obstetricians are re-credentialed at the same time in the system, at the time of their re-credentialing, they signed a Dear Provider letter that said, by becoming credentialed to deliver at our hospital, you are agreeing to X, Y, and Z. And everybody signed it. We didn't have anybody who didn't participate.
That's amazing. That's a great story. And again, I just wanted to underscore that because I think it's very important in terms of the culture of safety and a journey to high reliability and investment, not only in the leadership that you're providing as a OB perinatal safety leader, but that you're supported at the highest level of the system, CEO, and then the presidents of the hospital. So I think that's, congratulations on that work. That's really important. I think we have one more question from Tom.
We do. This is the last question. And it's regarding funding. I know for each institution and for each health system it's different, but this question was, how did you approach funding? For example, was there a pool of money to which you had to apply? Was it a grant? Did GNOSIS fall under a requirement that had to be met? What was your situation?
So our situation was we had a significant problem with poor outcomes that was recognized. We are self-insured. Our self-insurance group gave some seed money to initially hire and start this process. But once it was started, it then was funded by each hospital. And I gave a budget for what I needed, and believe me, my QI nurse for the system is my right-hand man. She's sitting right next to me. And Megan is the QI nurse for 6 hospitals. Now, they have people on the ground there too, but this is a lean organization. Once the initial seed money was spent, then it was supported by a budget for the system, and we assigned the proportion of contribution to that budget by the number of deliveries done.
So you
Does that make sense?
allocated it out based on, you allocated it out based on the volume of deliveries for each hospital.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So Nancy, I think we're coming to the end of the program. First of all, I want to thank you and thank everybody for joining today. Any, closing comments or words that you might have for anybody? Continue to fight the good fight. Never give up, never surrender. Right.
At every committee meeting, in every discussion that you're having, in whatever it is you're trying to accomplish at work, someone in that group, when you get lost, needs to say what is best for the patient, because it'll bring you back every time. Excellent.
Great words to end this presentation on today. Again, thank you, Dr. Cossler, and everything that you do at UH, and thank your team, and thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a great afternoon.